Welcome to the Greater Cincinnati Democrats. We have a wonderful list of people that I want you to make sure that you get a list. If you don't have a list, our new list that goes through May 14th. Our speakers has really done an outstanding job getting new good speakers from now until May. So please take a list, take it home, come when you really want to. We're really happy to be here. And we're really happy to be here for you. Okay. I have a couple of my own announcements, and then we have lots of announcements to go. Now this is way into the future, and I haven't given this to Peter yet. But we can't hear you. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Wow. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna kiss this thing. I have to speak louder. I can speak louder, folks.
Use your teacher voice.
He's going to turn it up. Okay, is that our speaker? Yes, she's here. Thank you. Okay, on June 11th, which is a long time away, I thought I would share with you a wonderful concert that's coming up. On The Secret, I play in the Sycamore Community Band, and I play the euphonium. It's a 70-piece band. We do 15 or 20 concerts a year. But one of the concerts that's really fun to share is one that's going to be in the Blue Ash Pavilion on June 11th. And because it's close to Flag Day, it's a Flag Day concert, and there's a whole lot of Rip Roarin' Sousa stuff. So it's really complicated music. It's really fun to play. So I'm going to invite you, and I'll be making that happen through Peter's newsletter as I get closer to the date. I have to find the actual place that we were going to be having the lunch. It's at 7 o'clock in the evening, and it's a really nice, assuming good weather. You know how it is, folks. I've been playing this concert for 25 years, and we've only had 2 rain days. So we will continue to do this. Okay, closer. Hello? You want to, I still need to be louder than that?
No, announcements.
Oh, you have announcements. Okay, I have a couple more announcements.
Okay.
This Friday, I have just spoke to Tanya Cooper, and Tanya does not want to help me do 2 naturalizations on Friday. There are 2 naturalizations. Anybody want to help me do with the legal women voters register?
The ceremony?
Yeah. You want to do it if no one else is there? Okay, well, just know that you be in touch with me, that I'm really interested in having you help me naturalize and get, it's probably like 120 to 130 people registered to vote in one day. It's really a nice thing to do. It's 2 days, and you have to kind of pay for your own lunch, and that's, you know how it is. You go down to the court, you pay, yeah. Come and help me if you want to, this Friday, 2 naturalization ceremonies. I don't see Rupert Townsend. Is Rupert Townsend here yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Rupert Townsend is a member of this luncheon on Tuesday, and she was on the front page of the Enquirer this morning. I want to say National Enquirer. Cincinnati. That would be something else. But she actually went to a Shabbat meeting, and she's there, you know, in the face of Shabbat, asking him a question on the front page of the paper this morning. So it's, I just felt really proud of our group here this morning that we made the front page of the New York of the Enquirer, Cincinnati Enquirer. Some other interesting news this week: purged voters are going to get another chance to register to vote. So be on the lookout for that. And all of us are going to be looking to get those purged voters back on the rolls one way or another. There are hundreds of thousands of them.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean? Purge voters are getting another chance. What are you referencing?
The former Attorney General,
No, on the paper, is there an article?
yeah, there's a whole article.
And what's the paper?
Inquirer from Sunday. Purged Ohio voters can get another chance to register to vote. Frank LaRose speaks at the Ohio Republican Party event on November, Mr. LaRose is sending a last chance mailers to voters purged from the rolls. He's giving another chance. You're welcome. You're welcome to.
Oh, no, I'll find it.
Oh, we have other people who have announcements. Okay.
Tonight at 6 o'clock, 6 to 8 o'clock, at the Community Shares offices, which is down at the Cincinnati Fire Museum on Court Street, there's going to be a Women's City Club along with Community Shares presentation on who wins, who loses, finding balance in neighborhood development. This is the first in a series of basically 3 that are going to be talking about development in neighborhoods, corporations, people, businesses, residential, talking about what we need for Cincinnati. And this will be the first so that we can get community input. So you can Google that online about who wins, who loses, finding balance in neighborhood development. Okay, Mike?
Some of you might know about the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. David Singleton and Al Gerhardstein, they're having their annual meeting on March the 7th, and they have James Foreman, who wrote a book called Locking Up Our Own, Crime and Punishment in Black America. So Ohio Justice is an advocate for inmates and make sure they sue the state when they're mistreated and whatever. It's a great organization. I have flyers here about it if anybody wants it.
Where is the meeting, Mike?
Hilton, Netherland Hilton, 6 o'clock on March 7th.
You will also notice they're on our program for April 16th, the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. They will be here then. Dick, did you want to make an announcement?
Yes. A couple of things I just want to mention in passing that Richard Asimus, Bold New Democrats, I think he's calling them.
Can't hear you.
Bold New Democrats are meeting at the Chameleon Restaurant. That's at 4114 Hamilton. Tonight, 6:30 if you want to come order beverage or food, and then meetings thereafter. The other thing I want to announce or talk about is thanks to Stan in Alberta, I have this neat little button. It reads, my memory's not so good. We're not asking very much, just democracy working as it should. And it really is a uniting kind of a thing, and I like to think of these things like wearing the bullseye. It's a conversation initiator, and it's already working. If I get these produced in mass, just roughly, how many people would be interested, just so I get an idea? Okay, thank you.
Morgan?
Board announcement.
Yes, thank you very much. Apparently the donkey awoke and couldn't see its shadow behind its anatomy, which means that the silly season for 2020 has started prematurely. I am getting rumors of people already going down to DCCC to David Pepper and so forth. So I am being forced to consider my run for 2020 as well, for which I have not made up my mind as yet. However, in the meantime, I have published a small book. If you remember Dr. Julie Heath's lecture on the economic situation, I explored the subject. I researched the data that she presented, I verified it, I expanded upon it, and prepare for the economic recession of 2020.
Shake this. When in doubt, turn it off, send it to its room for a timeout, and then turn it back on. Nope.
Yes.
Well, kind of.
Maybe it's me, maybe I have to share.
What office? What office are you running for?
This is Ohio Congressional District 1.
Wow.
All right. This book is free with a $20 donation to the campaign of Laura Ann Weaver. I'm still paying off the 2018 election.
There you go.
So I have to see what's going on, and I have to at least get my name out there. It's going to be a long time before any decision is made, but there are people already taking sides, making decisions, and gearing up for a race. So I am not one to shrug it off, and I want to get into the game if I can get into the game. The primary may have already been decided. I do not know, but let's see what happens. In any case, this is available. I'm going to leave it over there, and I'm going to leave some envelopes over there if you want a copy of the book. The money goes directly into the campaign fund at the attorney's office. I don't see it. Thank you.
There you go. We have a candidate from this group. That's really cool. Other announcements? Other announcements? Marlena. Another candidate from our group.
Hello.
You can be next.
try again.
Pamela, you can be next.
Hello. Okay. Better?
Oh.
Not best, but better? Okay. So again, Marlena Brookfield, running for Cincinnati Public School Board this year. And this week, got two big events going on. Thursday night is the big public campaign kickoff and fundraiser. That's at West Side Brewing. It's from 7 to 9. Come out. We'll have food. I will tell you some things. I will answer questions that people have, and I just want to get to know folks, so feel free to stop by. Friday night, I'm really excited about this one too, is the Bachfest Parade, and I have no limits on how many people can walk with me, so I'm just crossing my fingers that the weather holds. If you're interested, meet us on 8th Street between 5 and 5:30, and we'll step off about 6. I think that's all for me for now. Marlena Brookfield, running for Cincinnati Public School Board.
Go for it, Marlena. Other people who are not waving to their husbands. Okay, it looks like we're getting closer.
Then it's district, then it's by failure.
Okay, we have from the management. Dear our customers, to whom it may concern, we don't allow any food taking away whenever the event ended or left over from the buffet. We kindly appreciate your attention. Thank you to management of Lugeman. Whatever. Take that as you will, folks. Okay. There you go. So, without further ado, I have, I want to tell you how I met Julie LeMaster, or how I came to know Julie LeMaster. I was a teacher at, wait a second, we have another, where's our smaller person here? We have another small person.
Alberta, we cannot hear you.
Oh, we have another small person. Where's our other small person? I saw them here. Oh, they're over here. Okay, he's over here. Sid just came in, our 2-year-old. Just want you to know. Okay,
How you met?
what?
Picking up the thread, how you met.
How I met Julie LeMaster. I am still involved with I am still involved with my former school, which is the virtual high school down across from Taft High School. We take recovering students for 3 hours in the morning or 3 hours in the afternoon. And I have worked very closely with the community organizer because the person who is the social studies teacher is Republican and he doesn't encourage his kids to vote. So I get to get the kids to vote by going through the person who's the community organizer who gets the kids as they walk in the door. And as their birthday comes, she gives them a registration and we get them registered to vote. And earlier last year, the ICE came and took an African student back to Africa, sent him there without any warning, and she was just heartbroken that we lost a student because she hadn't done it, she hadn't known that he was in risk. And another kid came to her attention, and she says, "I'm turning it over to Alberta. She knows what to do." And I called the forces that be and was put in touch with the McMaster organization, which it works with the Xavier program, which is with the refugee center here in Cincinnati. And I took an 18-year-old kid, and turns out he just turned 18, and his 16-year-old brother have been here for 15 years. They have no papers except for the fact that they have Mexican birth certificates. And I took them over to the Roberts Paideia School, and really the only outcome we can have is to get them passports from Mexico. Nothing with the United States. And they have 2 younger brothers who were born here, and a mother who is illegal, and I mean, here's this family who's kind of sitting here hiding out in the open, and it's just, I can't tell you the frustration I feel. But the frustration I feel turned me to McMaster and her organization, because whatever can be done, she will make it happen. And I'm going to turn this program over to her because we all deserve good people in our lives like Julie McMaster and the work that she does here for us in Cincinnati. So, without further ado, Julie McMaster.
Thank you so much, Alberta, for that wonderful introduction. Closer? Not better? Really? Get close with the microphone. It's wonderful to be here. This is such a great turnout, and I hear you do this every week, and I'm looking at the list of speakers, so that's really wonderful. Congratulations. So I want you all to imagine, closer? No, I really have to keep my mouth on there, don't I? Okay. Over here? Is that good? Okay. So I want all of you to imagine not being able to leave your homes because you might be killed on the street with no one to protect you, or wondering when a bomb might fall on your house, or whether this is the day your family will be killed because of its religion or its tribal affiliation, or wondering every day whether your child will come home from school, or whether they'll be recruited by gangs or even killed by them. This, unfortunately, is what a lot of our immigrant and refugee communities have faced. And we have a large number of them here. And that's why we started the Immigrant and Refugee Law Center to help support families so that our community can thrive. A little bit of background about myself and how the IRLC came to be. I'm actually a native of Cincinnati. I grew up here. I've been back and forth a few times, as many of us have. Somehow Cincinnati always brings us back home. I actually started out my career more than 25 years ago working in immigration. This was even before I went to law school. I was working with an immigration attorney, and that's what actually made me decide to go to law school. I thought, well, I could do some good with this law degree thing. So I studied human rights at the UC College of Law. So my background's in international human rights law. I continued to do work with immigration. I also the last time I was in Cincinnati, I worked with the Freedom Center to help develop their human trafficking program. And after that, I spent several years in Washington doing international work, mainly with women in conflict countries, so obviously working on a lot of refugee issues and learning about the needs of and experiences of these communities. So I moved back to Cincinnati 2 years ago, and it was for personal reasons. I wasn't following work. I actually was continuing to do my DC-based international consulting work. And as I thought about what I would want to do more locally instead of continuing to run around the world as I was, I thought, I'd like to work with the local immigrant and refugee population. As I said, that's where I started my career. It's where my roots are. And as I said, working with people in conflict countries the past many years, that brings all of that international work back home. So at the end of July of 2017, so about a year and a half ago, I sat down with Darlene Kamine, who some of you might know. She is head of the Community Learning Center Institute. An old friend, a fellow Brandeis alum. I hadn't seen her in about 10 years, so we were just catching up over coffee, not knowing that coffee was going to change the course of things for our lives and in part the community. And she was talking to me about the community learning centers in the Cincinnati public schools. I don't know if all of you are familiar with the CLCs. I wasn't. The Cincinnati public schools have these community learning centers, which are meant to be hubs of services, support services for students and families, but also families in the broader community around the schools. So really a support system. And they've been providing all kinds of different services from health to mental health, to wellness, English language classes, transportation, all kinds of different needs. But the absolute number one need that they've been seeing for several years in their schools with large immigrant and refugee populations, such as Roberts Academy, which is in Price Hill, and the Academy of World Languages, which is over here in Evanston. Roberts Academy has about 65% English language learners now, mostly from Hispanic countries, the small growing population of West Africans, and the Academy of World Languages, about 50% of their families are refugee families from around the world. I think they have 40 countries represented. So the number one need they were seeing from families was the need for legal services. Because most of these families have some sort of immigration case, whatever their status. And as you can imagine, it's hard to get onto things like housing, like employment, and anything else without addressing immigration issues. Also, the principal of Roberts always tells the story that the day after the 2016 presidential election, attendance dropped by over 50%. Half of the kids did not come to school because they were so scared, because they've been hearing all of this horrible rhetoric coming out of the mouth of this person who is now elected president. So they were afraid for their lives, and they even saw that non-immigrant children were feeling afraid because they don't understand deportation. They don't understand what it means. They just are hearing all this hate and fearing that something might happen to them or their family. So they really saw the impact in the schools. So when Darlene was telling me about this, and she said, is this something you'd be interested in doing? I said, that's exactly what I want to do. So within a month, we had incorporated the organization, and last February, a few months later, we opened our doors at Roberts Academy. So now we're officially 1 year old. We just celebrated our 1 year anniversary. Thank you very much. And it's a very unique organization. As far as we know, we are the only organization of its type providing immigration legal services, or probably any type of legal services, directly in the schools. So we have been located in Roberts Academy, and as I said, they really have seen the effects of these horrible immigration policies on the students and how it destabilizes students, how it destabilizes families, how kids can't concentrate if they don't know what's going on with their parents. So they've been very supportive, and they've provided us space. And we've been able to plug in directly into the network there. So the Roberts Welcome Center which is housed within Roberts Academy, is really known to the immigrant population throughout Cincinnati. It's a trusted place. They've been working with families for years. In fact, it's their staff and the staff at Academy of World Languages that really identified this need. We've been really lucky in the sense of being able to plug directly in, because it's very hard, as you can imagine, to build trust in the communities, but they'd already built it for us. So we are now a part of that team. We work very closely with the Roberts staff. Also, the way the community learning centers work is that there are networks of different service providers, independent organizations. So we don't have to create our own social services. We already have them there. So when we work with, obviously a lot of our families, a lot of our kids have been traumatized and need different kinds of services, whether it's mental health, counseling, healthcare, or things like housing, employment, as I mentioned before. It's all right there. So it's a really unique model. It's been a tremendous first year. I'll get to in a minute to the kinds of cases we see, but as you can probably imagine, there's no lack of clients. We were created to fill a need, but also the outpouring of support from the community has been really amazing. I think especially in these days, people are really looking for ways to make a difference and to get involved, and we've had so many people come forward and want to volunteer and be a part of what we're doing. So that's been really quite amazing, and I was just able, for the past year, it's been myself as executive director / attorney doing everything with, again, the help of wonderful volunteers, and we do have a partnership with the UC College of Law where I'm also adjunct faculty. But it was myself, but I was just able to hire another attorney. So we're growing our capacity. This year we'll also be building our volunteer attorney program. So if anybody in the room is an attorney or knows an attorney that might want to get involved, be trained to work on different types of immigration cases, we'll be building out that program in addition to the other types of volunteer opportunities that we have. And I have to say it's really exciting. We've been hearing kind of anecdotally from the staff about the difference that our services are making in families, but we now have actual data showing how many kids we're actually affecting. In Roberts alone, more than 90 children have been affected, and that's one of probably about 17 or 8 schools, because we really get families from across the city. And the data shows that since we began providing the immigration legal services, attendance has gone up and parent engagement in the school has gone up. So that's really been amazing to see, again, that we were able to make a difference. Like I said, sometimes we can't guarantee the outcome of cases. That is usually up to immigration officials or judges. And it's, as Alberta was saying, it's not a very good climate, and I'll speak to that a little bit as well. But sometimes just being there to help people through the process, even if it means they can't always stay here, just to give them hope and provide that stability for the time being is really important. So it's been amazing to see that we have that concrete evidence. So in terms of the families that we work with, right now our families come from 19 different countries. That list is continuously growing. Our top two countries are Guatemala and Honduras, followed by Syria and Democratic Republic of Congo, and then a whole list of other countries from around the world. So if you didn't know that Cincinnati had a really little population already, you do now, because we're working, like I said, with people from all over the world. I should say we work with low-income immigrant families, so obviously people who can't afford to pay private attorneys. A large majority of our clients are refugees or asylum seekers, and I'll just explain the difference between those briefly, because we hear a lot of different things kind of in the news and being talked about, but not everybody understands the difference. So refugees and asylees are all people who have had to flee their country and are afraid to go back because of some form of persecution, whether it's based on religion, race, nationality, their political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. They're outside of their countries because they've had to flee. Now, refugees have gone through, when they're classified as refugees, they've gone through an entire process before they come to the U.S. So they're outside their home, their country of origin. They're already, if they are seeking asylum, they are exercising a right that they have, that this government is trying to take away from them, that they are not entering the country unlawfully. Despite that fact, they are all detained. So a person who comes to our country seeking asylum is immediately put into detention. And these places are jails. Don't let anybody fool you. I've been to them. I spent a week this summer working at the border in Dilley, Texas, at a facility, a family detention facility that houses women and children who are seeking asylum. And they go through a process to see whether they're going to be allowed into the country to make their cases. And if they are, then we get a lot of families. One of the reasons I decided to go work at the border is because we do have a lot of families here that come through that. So, when we hear about the border crisis and especially that summer, things were ramping up, it's really important to understand that those families end up in places like Cincinnati. Most of them don't stay in Texas or Arizona. Some of them do, others go other places in the country where they might have other family or friends or end up. So it's really important to understand that we have those families in our community. We have lots of families that have experienced separation. So the separation that was happening at the border over the summer, which was stopped by the courts, which seemed to be the only branch of government actually doing their jobs, thank goodness. I, for instance, had a young man, I think he's 12 years old. He came in, his mother and sister had come to the country about 6 months before him. They were fleeing gang violence in Honduras. And he came in with the remaining women in his family, so his great-grandmother, his mother, his great-grandmother, his grandmother, and his aunt. They were all separated at the border because that was the time when the government was separating adults and children. So he described, as so many have, the conditions. First, when people are first detained, they're in La Guerrera, which in Spanish means the icebox. Because when they're first detained, they're put in a holding cell that's incredibly cold. There's no windows. They don't have concept of time. So if you ask them how long they were there, they often don't know. It might be hours, it might be days. Then they go to what I think everybody has seen on the news is what they call the dog cages. And they are cages. It's what we see on the news. It's not fake news. And this young man, this 12-year-old, described, sleeping on the floor with other kids, being kicked and yelled at by immigration officials, being woken up in the middle of the night in order to take roll call. We have another young man who's 16 now. He also came in on his own, and he described, the children around him crying. And asking what was wrong, and they said, they've been separated. They had been told that by immigration officials that they're, oh, your mother is going to court, she'll be right back, and never came back. So all these stories are real, and we're working with a lot of these people here. We also work with the refugee population, so those people who have been lucky enough to go through this process before they come into the country. We help them with next steps, things like getting their green cards, permanent residency, and citizenship. We also help them with family reunification. So a lot of times, not the entire family is resettled at once, so we do have families who have even children that are still in other countries in refugee camps, so we work to help them be reunited. And also, to make sure, it's very important to make sure that they have the correct legal advice, because even though they come in with status, a wrong step or a missed deadline can put them out of status, which under this administration is a very, very dangerous place to be. They told me stories at the Academy of World Languages of parents who had refugee status, who missed deadlines, fell out of status, were wrongly deported, and families were separated. So again, that's happening in our community. We also work with unaccompanied minors. I've already mentioned a few. These are young kids who are coming into the country alone, sometimes to be reunited with parents who have had to leave them as babies to come here, escape violence, make a better life. Other times, they've had to come on their own and have nobody here. These are really amazing children. Anyone who works in the schools might know some of them. They've gone through these incredible treks. And, another thing I think is really important to point out these days when you hear things like, oh, people were, we need to build a wall because people were putting their children at risk, they're putting their lives at risk, they're doing all these horrible things. It's actually quite the reverse. People are making a conscious decision to make this very dangerous trek that can take weeks or months. If you're coming from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, which are the most dangerous countries in the world right now, you have to go through a few countries. You might be kidnapped, you might be raped, especially if you are a woman or a girl. And you're leaving your homes, really. I mean, who generally chooses to leave their home if they don't have to? So we have to be aware of the journeys that people are making. And there's a reason why they're doing that. So we work with these wonderful kids who make that journey and come here, and most of them get into school. They're learning English, they want to work, and they're really quite inspiring. We also work with immigrants who have been victims of crime in our community. So in 2008, Congress passed a law granting a certain type of visa to immigrants who are victims of crime here in the US. And the reasoning behind that is we want to promote safe communities. So we want people to come forward and report crimes, no matter what their status. They shouldn't be afraid. And they should be able to work with law enforcement and go after the criminals if possible. So they are able to, for certain crimes, obtain this U visa, which then leads to residency and citizenship. And unfortunately, there is a high rate of crime in the immigrant communities because people see them as very vulnerable, especially people who might be undocumented and can't get bank accounts here in Cincinnati. So they are walking around a lot of times with cash. People watch them. People know when their paydays are. So there are a lot of muggings and robberies and things like that. And then we work on different types of family unification cases. So I'm sure everybody here probably understands that we have a crisis in our nation and our community when it comes to immigration, and it really is a crisis of human rights. Our system has become completely inhumane. We have a bogus national emergency that has just been declared. All the statistics show that it is not an emergency, and in fact the president himself in his press conference said, I didn't have to do this, I just want to do it faster. And the hateful and divisive rhetoric has just made things so difficult. And I can tell you, as somebody from working on the inside, they're really trying to close the doors everywhere we turn. There are so many, on a weekly basis it seems like, horrible policies coming out that directly affect families in our community. I talked about separation at the border. It happens here as well. Alberta mentioned, people being picked up by ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which are the immigration police, very aptly called ICE. We see that there are parents who have been picked up taking their children to school. They've been stopped in cars, stopped while driving brown or black or basically anything but white. They have been, picked up at bus stops waiting to go to work. We've seen immigration officials bust down doors and get into people's houses and rough them up. All of which are unconstitutional. People in this country, no matter what their status, do still have certain constitutional rights. So there are a lot of civil rights violations going on, and we've seen this last little over a year ago, in December of 2017, there were major immigration sweeps in northern Kentucky, and all of these things happened. And in fact, I saw that Don Sherman from LULAC is on the program next week. He and I worked with some of the people who have been affected by that, and we work on a lot of different issues together. And the increased detention that we're seeing is because the priorities have changed. So it's not that people weren't being detained and deported under previous administrations. In fact, President Obama was often called the deporter-in-chief because so many people were being deported. However, under past administrations, there were different priorities. So they did prioritize people with criminal records, or people who might pose a threat to our national or community security. And that's okay. Obviously, not everybody has a right to be in this country. But they weren't focusing on other families that might have been here, that had no background, that have been working, that have been supporting their families, contributing to their system. Under this administration, all of those different priorities went away. Everybody is a priority. Especially again, from what we can tell, if you're not the right color. One of the facts that most people don't know is that the majority of foreign nationals who are in this country in unlawful status, as we call it, have not entered illegally. They've actually entered on some kind of maybe a visitor's visa or student visa and overstayed. Exactly, they're overstays. But we don't seem to be as concerned about them, or the students from Europe who might have overstayed, or the professionals who are here that overstayed. But everybody else is a priority. We see entire workplaces being raided. Over the summer, there were workplace raids in North and Northeast Ohio. We're kind of constantly gearing up for that to happen here. And again, when you think about the economics of all this, it doesn't make any sense because you're taking away entire workforces. Another, a big myth that we hear in immigration is that, people are coming in, they're taking our jobs, they're, taking benefits out of our system without paying, when in fact the opposite is true. Most of the jobs they're taking are not being filled by American citizens. There's documentation that immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, pay millions, even billions of dollars in taxes annually, and people who are undocumented can't actually take out of the system. So there are plenty of people in this country who are paying in who can't even take out. Time flies when you're having fun. It sure does. So, I could go on and on. Just Another situation in our community that I want to mention, some of you might have seen in the news, involves Black Mauritanians. Mauritania is a country in Western Africa that has been traditionally known as a slave state. It officially abolished slavery in 1981. Didn't pass implementing legislations till the early 2000s. At the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, the majority Black Mauritanians were pushed out by the minority Arabs. Many of them were literally taken, put across the river into Senegal, kicked out of the country. So a lot of people came here seeking refuge. Some of them, for different technical reasons, because they had sought bad advice, their asylum claims were not granted. But past administrations did not deport them because they know that Mauritania is a terrible place, especially for Black citizens. Most of them who are living here have been stripped of their citizenship, so they actually, now that they're being returned, they're immediately imprisoned, often accused of anti-government bias, anti-government activities because they've been here seeking asylum, and facing very just deplorable conditions when they go home. And as I said, past administrations were not deporting them. They gave them work permits. They said, we're going to let you stay here. We're going to let you work. So these people have been, they've lived here for 20 to 30 years. They've been working. A lot of them have businesses. They have children. They have families that have been born and raised here. But now a lot of them are being rounded up and sent back. So again, I could go on and on with the stories. But just to say, it's an incredibly challenging time, and I gave a speech a talk the other day, and at the end, I know people were incredibly depressed. But I do want to say, like I said, our organization is making a difference, and that's been really amazing to see. Everybody in here can do something. Certainly, we welcome your support. We are happy to take donations. I have information on that, but also, as I said, we have volunteers, so if you're interested, we can certainly talk about that. Spreading awareness is really key. Like I said, I could probably go on for hours, but I know our time is limited, but even just in the little you've heard today, or you'll hear from Don next week, you'll hear from others what you read, spread the awareness, let people know what's happening, and especially that it's not just in Texas or Arizona. These, people are in our community, and these are people that are part of our community. They're in the schools, they're working, they want to be an important part of our society. They want to contribute. They have come here to make better lives. You can talk to your representatives, obviously making them aware of the bad policies that are being made and that they shouldn't represent our communities in that way. Also getting to know immigrant and refugee families. There are various organizations that have mentoring programs, ways to connect, and that's important because I think in our society today there's so much othering, there's so much division, so we have to really understand, we're all just people. We all have eyes, we all have mouths, we all have eat and work and go to school if we can. We just might do it in different ways, so I think that's really important. So I know I want to leave time for questions, so I will answer that. Thank you.
Julie, thanks for your inspirational talk.
It's working.
Okay.
Right up to it.
My question is, you say you're pretty much entwined with the city of Cincinnati schools, at least you originated there. I was wondering, in the county or in the outer part, is there a need, and do you reach those people too?
Yes, well, I'd say there's a need everywhere. Right now, because of capacity, we are focused on Cincinnati, and also because we do have that strong community learning center model in the city. But I think ultimately we want to be a model for other communities to be able to provide these kinds of services. So whether it's through us being able to expand in our community or to show other communities how it can be done, that certainly is a future goal of ours.
I hear from my conservative friends all the time, those immigrants are taking our government benefits. They're getting food stamps, they're getting this, they're getting that. I don't think that's happening. Can you please explain what benefits they get from the government, not from social services, because those are voluntary, but what kind of government benefits are provided to people who enter the country illegally?
Sure, and actually I have a myth versus fact sheet that I usually bring. I didn't bring it today, but I'm happy to share it. I can email it or share it with Alberta to share it around. It has a lot of these different myths and facts. That, of course, is a big one. So somebody who's undocumented cannot access any public benefits. If they have U.S. citizen family members, those family members can. So yes, if people have children that are born here, those children could receive Medicaid, food stamps, cash assistance, anything that's available to U.S. citizens, because that's what they are. But the parents and family members themselves who are not documented don't get any benefits.
Can they go to school?
They can, yes, there is a right.
That's a benefit.
Right, well, yeah, you're right. So there is, all children, no matter what their status, do have a right to primary education.
Can I answer a little part of her question, if I may? Sorry, butting in. America represents 12% of the world's population. 64% of all Nobel Prizes have been won by Americans, generally first or second generation. I think it's a good idea we educate them.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I'm not disagreeing.
And I'm an immigrant, although I don't actually have a Nobel Prize. And I will say, being an immigrant is very difficult. We've been here 30 years, we both came, we look Norwegian, and we both have PhDs, and it was still very, very difficult. What the hell is it like when you are on the way down from Honduras? I can hardly imagine.
And I think that that's a good point too. And on that myth versus fact sheet, there are figures about, I can't remember the statistic, but there's actually a larger percentage of foreign nationals or immigrants established businesses. It's higher than actually native-born citizens.
Sure.
So that goes exactly.
If you're looking for terrorists, look no further than the American white male.
Soy muy agradecido a su servicio a los refugiados. Señor, muchas gracias. I'm so grateful for her service, and I have done human rights work for Guatemalans for 17 years, victims of the war of genocide in Guatemala, and I've lived with Maya Sutujil in Guatemala over several years. They plead with me, because I can't come back for health reasons, they plead with me to assist in educating people about what is happening there among their people. And people come here, they don't want to leave their homes, they don't want to leave their families. The situation is horrendous in so many different ways. So hard for us to understand here. But and many of those situations have been aggravated and sometimes even caused by United States foreign policy. And this is something most Americans have no clue over whatsoever. And so I'm so glad that you're providing this service. I have many friends who are refugees here. But I would like to be able to have ideas for ways people can do something here. I mean, obviously, spreading the word and so on is important, but if there are any other ways that people can become volunteers in this effort, I'd like to pass it out here or however I can help.
Thank you so much. I'll just follow up with a few points. One, international advocacy is my background, so I've always said that we have to get to the root causes. So we have to understand exactly why people are coming here and how we can help them stay home, not because we don't like immigrants, but because we want people to be able to live peacefully in their homes. And so we have to really look at, when the administration says, well, if people come here, we're going to cut off aid, well, that's completely counterproductive, and we're just going to cause more people to come here. Another important point, obviously we could talk about the politics and all the regimes, the bad regimes that we've supported, especially in Central and Latin America. But we hear a lot about the gangs, MS-13 for instance. That gang was actually exported from the U.S. So in the mid-90s, which was the last time our immigration law actually changed, there was the list of deportable offenses or the reasons that immigrants could be detained was expanded. So we had a lot of young men from those Northern Triangle countries like Honduras and El Salvador who were put in jail. And they learn the gang culture, because when you're in jail, you usually, you have to join one or the other to keep yourself safe. So then they were deported from the homes they knew back to their countries, and that's actually the origin of gangs like MS-13. So it's important to keep those things in mind. And like I said, I'm happy to share our organization information to people who want to get involved. There are also, other organizations in town. There's the Immigrant Dignity Coalition. Is a coalition of groups that work, on different aspects of immigrant issues. You might take a look at their website and see the organizations that are involved there. And they usually have volunteer opportunities as well.
Back here.
I want to thank you so much for what you're doing. I know you could be making big bucks at Procter & Gamble or GE. Would you talk about how our war on drugs is feeding some of this?
That's a good question. And a lot of folks, bless you. I think there are a few different aspects. I mean, one, our war on drugs. Actually, this year I got hooked on the Netflix series Narcos. I don't know if any of you have seen them. My son actually got me hooked on it, and it actually it starts in, I guess, maybe the late 70s or 80s, and it follows the DEA. First, it's around Pedro Escobar. And how the DEA went after him, but it also shows how the CIA was kind of working counterproductively to that because we had the anti-communism effort. So going back even to those days, there was a lot of kind of conflict in our policy, and then obviously I think a lot of our policy has tried to do away with things without really thinking of the repercussions. What happens when you go in and burn fields and try to get rid of drugs that way, and a lot of other governments have done that. We've supported them in that. Also, we have to think about we're the U.S. is the biggest consumer of all of these drugs, so it's really the consumers here that are driving the trafficking of drugs that comes in. Of course, we hear that's another reason why we have to build a wall. Most of the drugs are not coming in, they're coming in at legal ports of entry, whether it be at airports or in ports of entry where people drive through in their cars. That's how they're coming in. So again, we have to think about, who are the consumers of those drugs, and how we can, again, get to the root causes, and building walls is not going to stop that.
Just say no. Just say no.
Can you hear me? Okay, you mentioned sometimes you're not successful and folks are deported. Are there any friendly countries that will take these folks, or do they have to go back to their country of origin?
Well, when somebody's actually deported, they're put on a plane by the U.S. government and sent back to their country. So, at that point they have no choice. They could maybe then do what they did to get to the U.S. and get to another country, but we at the moment, we don't generally send them back to another country. There is an option when you're in court on an asylum case of designating a country. So if you want to choose another country that if you're sent back, you'll be sent back to, there's that option. As a legal strategy, we never, we just don't say a country because we want the person to stay here. It's certainly not going to be sent back to their own country. There is a point in cases where, if somebody really doesn't have a case, they have the option of asking for what's called voluntary departure. So they say, look, okay, I'm going to give up my claim for relief. I will leave the country, I will buy my own ticket, and then they can go wherever they want as long as they leave the country. And that also avoids them having that order of deportation on their record, which can affect them being able to come back into the country. But again, that means they have to pretty much give up their case and say, all right, I'm not going to go any further, I'm going to leave voluntarily.
Right here.
Hi, thank you for coming. I belong to a grassroots group called Shut Tornillo Down, and we were in El Paso at Tornillo. We had a lot of, we went into a couple of the shelters there. Okay. And now we're working on shutting down Homestead. We've been, and there have been articles on the group. There are people down at Homestead now. We were just in DC 2 weeks ago. We spent 3 days. We hit about 500 offices lobbying. I met Chad. He knew absolutely nothing about Tornillo or Homestead. He didn't know what Tornillo was. He was totally clueless. So I don't know if you have any, and I'm thinking now that just, we had a press conference in DC with Representatives Chu, Castro, and Senator Merkley, who have co-sponsored this bill to shut all these the facilities for youth. You know what it is, okay? So they've co-sponsored it. We're the ones who have basically pushed it. But I'm looking for some other maybe legal way to try to shut down the facility in Homestead. It now has, it originally was going to have 1,000 beds. When they shut Tornillo down, they added 1,000 more beds. So now there's almost like 2,000 kids there. And by the way, the ice boxes that you mentioned before, there were people in there with babies for up to 4 or 5 days. And when they come out, it is only like 55 degrees in there, and they're on the floor, they're sleeping on the floor. I mean, it's really, people don't know. And while I was there and while I was in DC, my daughter is an immigration lawyer for the DOJ, and I kept texting her and saying, do you know that they're doing this and this? Finally, she just said, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. And there's a lot of things that we're doing that people don't know about, that democracies aren't supposed to be doing. So if you have any ideas on how to shut, but just real quickly too, there are other, if people are looking for other groups to volunteer with, if you go online, there's a group called Immigrant Families Together, started by a woman in Queens, and now it's national. There's a Midwest chapter, and what they do is they help give rides to people who are going through, who have been released from ICE, and they're going through to different cities. They give rides, they bond people out, because a lot of times the only reason people can't get out is because of the bonds. So they raise funds, so it's Immigrant Families Together. If you're a little older, there's another group called Grannies Respond, and it was grandparents who decided this is terrible, and they caravanned, and there's about 100 of them went down to El Paso, and now that's a national organization, so it's called Grannies Respond. That's also online. So there's a lot of community effort going on.
Yeah, that's great. And for those of you who don't know, we're talking about the children's shelter. So children, the unaccompanied minors who come in, they're sent to shelters, often flown around the country to different places. And there are several, I don't know if those are owned by Southwest Key.
No, the one at Homestead is owned by Caliber.
Okay, it's Caliber. So
which is private, and they're making money. They're making about $1,000 a day on every kid that's there.
right, and so that's so. The Southwest Key and probably some of the others have been they're being sued for sexual violations, abuse and things like that. But that's another point I was going to make, is that this is an industry. This is a private prison industry. And actually Congress has mandated there's a minimum number of beds and a minimum number of people that need to be detained every day. And it's because you have these huge private companies running these detention centers. And much like the gun lobby and others, they have no interest in seeing this shrink. In fact, they want to keep it, this is more than 50% of their profit. So it's big business, and they do big lobbying. So trying to, counteract with the awareness is important.
5,000 a day?
34,000 a day is actually.
34,000 a day. 34,000 a day for each kid?
No, for overall. Yeah.
How many for each
Minimum
kid?
beds.
$1,000. About, yeah. I know, don't quote me on that, but basically they are making money. They're making a profit off of every kid who's there. And it opened with 1,000 beds. When Tornillo shut down in El Paso, they added 1,000 more beds. And they're all unaccompanied kids. Most of them range in ages from 13 to 17, but there's actually, at least in Tornillo in El Paso, there were little kids, there were toddlers. So, and they're very secretive. It's really hard to get in. So I'm trying to figure out a way to get in.
Thank you. Right here.
Could you say a few words about medical care for undocumented immigrants? If they lack benefits, you said, so can they go to the emergency room? Can they be admitted? What happens if they have a chronic and serious disease like cancer? What happens to these people?
So, much like uninsured people, they have to try to find a way to cover the expenses themselves. There are, like I said, through, for instance, the Community Learning Center and other organizations, there are healthcare services, organizations that are trying to assist people who might not be able to get assistance through the usual routes.
Well, can they go to an emergency room?
Want to be turned in?
Well, I'm asking.
They're most likely not going to be turned away, but they're going to get a big bill. And of course, there's always that risk of ICE coming. So, at this point, the only places that are safe from immigration enforcement are schools and religious organizations. We've seen them go into hospitals.
what legally happens to the children who are separated, or what are the legal options if they're not reconnected with their families?
So, the ACLU and others, they've been the ones that have been driving the litigation. There was a judgment that, parents who were unrightly separated and deported, because a lot of them ended up signing for deportation, leaving their children. In fact, I saw this happening when I was there down at the border this summer. There was a ruling that those parents need to be brought back, and their cases seemed through, but then they said, okay, the ACU and others need to take care of doing that. I don't know where things stand, and as you can imagine, it's very difficult. Also, even with this court judgment, it's still up to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, DHS, to decide whether they're going to let them into the country. So it's very challenging.
On that line, when you're talking about DOJ and Customs, federal preemption and uniform adoption and foster care statutes. I know in Ohio, are we doing as well as other states in permitting adoption and foster care of some of the kids at the border, especially if they're in third-party vendor contract private bed units?
Honestly, I don't know about that. Most of the kids that arrive here, so we don't have any shelters in Ohio that will take unaccompanied minors. So if they've been released to a place in Ohio, it means they've been released to some sort of family member or friend or somebody here that's sponsoring them. Now, whether a lot of times, they're released to whoever, some family member or friend who then abandons them. So then the question is what happens with them. But I don't know about the direct, fostering and adoption from the shelters. I'm not sure, but New York has shelters, so it does. I mean, I know that there have been cases. I think we had a family here where one of the kids was in a shelter in New York and then was staying with a family. They weren't adopted by the family, but they had been fostered by the family for a time. But again, New York has shelters, so they have more kids coming in who might not have any family that they're going to.
Just real quick, if they do look for foster families just because so they can get kids out of the shelters. And as far as reuniting, a lot of the parents were deported, and ACLU doesn't know where they are, and can't find them. They don't know what country they're in, where they can't find them.
We're going overtime. I think we have a pretty captive audience today. Could we maybe take just a couple of minutes break and let those leave who have to leave, and then continue? I mean, I think we've got one of the livest wires we've had.
Ladies and gentlemen, Julie McMaster. Smart enough to escape, then you can ask your questions in person.
Want to bother
She knows
right? You know what I'm talking about? So the Homeland
Thank you
Security
for
said,
coming.
well, sorry, we can find the
Next week, we have a wonderful time. We have Don Sherman coming with the Civil Rights League of American Citizens. Come on back next week. Thank you.
Can they go to the emergency room? Can they be admitted? What happens if they have a chronic and serious disease like cancer? What happens to these people?
So much like uninsured people,